All right. Good day, everybody. Thank you for joining us today on yet another episode of the podcast. And today I have an incredible guest with us today. It is Mr. Knut Andersen, and he would be sharing with us on the topic of the role of agriculture in humanitarian responses, the challenges as well as the opportunities that lies within it. And so before we start out the conversation, I would like to read out his bio so that you guys can get to know him a bit. Mr. Knut Andersen is an experienced leader and development practitioner with rich history of working in complex humanitarian and development contexts across Africa. He has led senior management positions both in Norway and internationally, demonstrating a strong ability to lead impactful programs in challenging environments. Mr. Anderson previously served as the country director at the Development Fund, where he was responsible for overseeing all programs in Ethiopia and Somalia. His work is focused on long-term adaptation and business development and gender equality, while also addressing urgent humanitarian needs in both countries. Following his success in this role, Mr. Knott has advanced to the regional director, where he expanded his leadership to cover Ethiopia, Somalia, Malawi, and Mozambique, further driving his further driving sustainable development and emergency response across this region. Currently, Mr. Nancy serves as the global lead for livelihood and food security at the Norwegian Refugee Council (NRC). In this capacity, he leads the global strategy to strengthen livelihoods, build food security for displaced and vulnerable population worldwide. He is passionate about creating lasting solutions that empowers community to thrive despite adversity, making him an invaluable voice to global conversation across sustainable agriculture, climate resilience, and humanitarian actions. Uh, Thank you so much, Mr. Anderson, for coming on the podcast once again. It's such a delight to have you here with us.
Thank you for inviting me.
Fantastic. So, as we start out the conversation, my very first question to you is: in your experience, how can you say that agriculture can be effectively integrated into humanitarian responses, particularly in displaced settings where resources and land access is often limited?
Yeah, of course, that is challenging and it is different in different contexts. But I think it's important to remember that many of the displaced people often come from agricultural communities. So they have been working either as farmers or herders, or even some people as fishermen or
Okay.
fisherwomen. So of course, this is what they know, and this is what used to be their livelihood. So that's important to have in mind. This is, of
True.
course, mostly happening in rural context. But
Okay.
I think it's also important to remember that they have skills, they have knowledge when people are displaced. It's not like they're coming to a new place and they don't bring anything with them. And that is already something that we need to look at and see what opportunities can that give us, even in the challenging context. So in
Yeah.
some context where you have refugees or internally displaced people, if they are displaced within their own country, it's to look at what are the barriers for them to do agriculture, for example. And very often
Yeah.
it's land access is the biggest challenge, and access to water. Like these are the two main challenges. So then
True.
it's to start to look at what are the systemic barriers and how can we address that. So that's what we often do when we start to look at what are the opportunities in the areas that we intervene.
Oh, fantastic. That's really amazing. It's good. I like the fact that you highlighted that even though these persons are displaced, they are also coming with, skill sets and, competences. So thank you for sharing that. In your own experience, what are some of like the key theories or models that guide like the design of agricultural interventions in these conflict areas or post-conflict zones And how has this framework evolved in terms of like the response to modern day challenges?
Yeah, I think it's very often based on again the specific context in the area that they are displaced, but
Okay.
then it's to look at what are the challenges that they are facing because they are displaced. Because many of the people that are more referred to as host community, because these are the people that are living in the areas that other people are coming to, they also have challenges.
True.
But there are some displacement specific challenges, and then we need to look at that. So in NRC, we are also looking at the legal side of things, and more the systemic barriers, as I mentioned before, that how can we address that? So we need to look at these opportunities before we start to design an actual project. So it's not just like a copy paste from what we have done before or what has been done in other area. You really need to contextualize and make sure that a more integrated way of working, because it can be linked to land and water, as I talked about before, but it's also the systemic barriers. Like, for example, are the refugees allowed to work in agriculture in the country that they are coming to, which is very different in different countries based on the laws that are there. So these are things that we need to look at. And then we need to do proper assessments. I think assessment is something that is sometimes overlooked. We do like quick assessments and whatever, but it needs to be proper assessments. So for what are the possibilities, and also looking at the markets. I think that's also something that is definitely not looked at enough, because whatever we are doing, it has to be linked to a market, both in terms of how to get things from the market, inputs for agriculture, that can be seeds or tools or whatever, but also if they have surplus production, where do you sell your things? So I think the market access and the market systems is something that is really important to look at.
Fantastic. It's good to understand that the first point of call is usually like the needs assessment, and also sort of trying to contextualize the solutions that will be created for those communities.
Yeah, exactly.
Fantastic. Also, can you sort of share with us, let's say, like a specific example or a core case study where agricultural programs has sort of significantly improved food security and resilience among refugees or internally displaced population?
Yeah, I think in this case I can highlight our work in Uganda. Uganda is one of the countries that have most refugees in the world,
Yes.
actually.
Yes, it is.
So they are hosting refugees from many countries, like South Sudan, from Congo, from many of the neighboring countries. And I was there myself a couple of years ago, seeing how we are working in the north of Uganda with the focus of access to land first. So then we were working with the Office of the Prime Minister to make sure that the displaced people, in this case refugees, had access to land. And then it's like, that's the first step. And then you need to do proper training for the people if they are not so familiar with farming. Many were, as I mentioned before, quite familiar with farming. But then we are focusing on climate smart agriculture, because the climate is changing, the weather patterns,
Yes.
and all of that.
True.
And then we are also working with the markets, as I mentioned, to make sure that they have access to tools and seeds, and also places to sell. And then that they can, for example, aggregate their produce so they get better prices when they sell it. And we saw that the people had quite a significant improvement in their food security, and also their diversity in terms of the diet, because that is also important in terms of nutrition, that they're not eating just the same all the time, the ugali day in, day out, but they are actually diversifying what they are eating. So I think in Uganda we have some really good examples of this, but it starts with the access to land. And because Uganda has quite progressive laws in terms of what refugees can do, and they are very much working together with us, or we are working together with them, with the local authorities, to make sure that this is the starting point, and this can actually move us forward in terms of increased production, and then sustainability of of their livelihood, and then having more to eat and also something to sell in the market, so that they can, very often it's when they can sell some surplus, they can have some money to use for health services or for school fees or for other things, because people have a diverse need. It's not just one thing.
Very true, very true. Also, sort of speaking about smart climate agriculture, how does the Norwegian Refugee Council approach climate smart agriculture in humanitarian settings? And what are like the practical steps that can be taken to build such resilience among displaced farmers?
Yeah, again, it's comes down to the context, and we are looking at kind of what are the climatic challenges in these areas. What do they normally grow? But what is also, because if the rain pattern is different from what it was before, sometimes it rains less. It rains maybe not less, but it rains a lot in a very short period of time, and that is also a challenge. So we need to analyze these kind of things and make sure that whatever we are promoting is sustainable and being adapted to the context that they are in. So, for example, short maturing varieties, so that instead of a maize variety that takes 90 days to grow, then you can do 60 days. Or there are others like sorghum or millet or other varieties or crops that has a shorter lifespan, because that works better in an environment where you have less water. But then you can also promote, for example, regenerative agriculture, where you kind of take care of also the environment around you. You make sure that you collect more water, because when the rain comes, a lot of the water just runs off, and it takes with it maybe the topsoil, and where it's really the good thing for the production of food. So also you can do that. You're working on planting trees, collecting the water, making the water actually go down into the ground. So there are different ways of working on doing this, and we have different kind of curricula that we are using. We are not inventing the wheel again, because there is a lot of good curricula out there, and it's better to use what is already there. For example, what FAO has been developing, and things like that.
Okay, fantastic. That's really good. So, what's like one of the critical barriers in the displaced context with regards to access to land? And what's like the innovative solutions that have emerged to overcome this land tenure or water scarcity or resource allocation challenge of these refugees?
Yeah, I think, as I mentioned, the important thing for us in NRC is that we are working on that legal side. So, of course, I'm the expert on livelihood and food security, but we also have experts in NRC that on legal issues. So we call it information counseling and legal assistance. So these are experts that we work very closely together. So when I said we work with, for example, the Office of the Prime Minister in Uganda, it is our legal team that is doing that kind of work, because they know like how can we develop these agreements, because you need to have an agreement. In this case, it's with the government. In other cases, it can be with private landowners, so that you can have either, most of the time you have a legal right to use the land. So you get maybe an agreement for 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. It's not like we will get the land on a permanent basis, which is fine. But as long as they have the legal right to use the land, that is really the key thing for us. So I think for NRC, that is one of the big advantages, because we have this legal expertise in-house. So we are using that to make sure that people have the access to land, because without that, it will be very difficult to do anything around agriculture. And it's very risky if you don't know if you can prepare the land, and then maybe by harvesting time, the landowner come and say, by the way, I will now harvest all the crop. That would be a very bad thing for people. So we need to have the legal documentation in place and having clear agreements with the owners of the land.
Okay, that's fair enough to know that there's also that need for that agreement, clear legal terms well spelled out, so that everybody knows what their responsibilities are in the context of the project. That's
Yeah.
beautiful. So, from your global perspective, how would you say secular agriculture can be applied to the, applied in this displaced people or humanitarian contexts to sort of reduce waste, improve productivity, and support sustainable food systems?
Yeah, I think, as you rightly say, food system is what we need to focus on. So the food system, I don't know, many of you have probably seen that cycle, like you start with the kind of the land preparation and then the
Yeah,
planting and all of that. So
yeah,
it's to make sure that we are actually working on each of the component in a food system, including
right.
the waste. Because the last part of a food system is what is left after you have consumed the food.
Yes,
So some places you give the leftovers to, maybe you have livestock, or you can use it in compost, for example, and then you apply that to your soil before you start the next cycle
cycle.
again.
Yes,
So it's really to look into that and making things as sustainable as you can, and to avoid that, for example, that there is not a lot of plastic laying around, and you need to collect kind of these things, because unfortunately that is the fact that there is quite a lot of, for example, plastic bags flying around many places, and that is not good for the soil, and it's definitely not good for the animals. It's a lot of goats that are eating these plastic bags. I'm sure you've seen it, which is not
I agree.
a good thing. So we also need to be taking our responsibility as practitioners when we are, if you have a bag of seeds, for example, that is very often a plastic bag. So what do you do with that bag? Or if you have either chemical fertilizer, or you have pesticides or herbicides, like what do you do with these containers? So we need to be
Yeah.
very much aware of what we are doing, that so we are recycling it in a proper way.
Okay, thank you so much for sharing that with us. So, how does NRC ensure that displaced population, particularly women and youths, gain agricultural skills and knowledge necessary to sustain their livelihood just beyond the emergency assistance?
Yeah, I think for us, it's women and youth are very often specific target groups, so that we target them with specific activities or interventions, because the needs or the barriers for different people, even if you think that, okay, this is a refugee, or he or she has these barriers, but being a woman or being a young person have different barriers than being a man or an older man, or these kind of things. So we need to look at that. So when we're doing the needs assessment and the barriers assessment, we need to look at these kind of differences and see how can we address that. So for women, we have to make sure that they have equal access, for example, both when it comes to land, but also to agriculture inputs, because sometimes we assume that men and women have equal access, which is not the
True.
case. And for, and,
Yeah.
and for young people, it's important to make sure that they are accepted in the society, in the communities, and being farmers. And maybe they can do something else than just the normal farming. That in a food system there are many processes that needs to be
Yeah.
done.
They
So
must
some
manage
can,
it.
yeah, so some can use their skills maybe more on the processing, on the selling, on other things than just the one on production. So
Yeah.
as you mentioned, through the whole value chain. So it's important to identify what are the opportunities and what could different segments of the people, so young people or women, do related to that. And also for women, very often it's caregiver activities that needs to be looked into, because they have the responsibility for the children. They also do
Yeah.
the household chores. So to be careful that we don't put another burden on them to do the production in addition to this. So it's a balance on these things, and then how can we make sure that they have the opportunity to do some meaningful work, but at the same time not ending up in family conflicts because we take time away from their normal chores.
Mhm. So that means typically it's a situation where the skill set that people have and also what allows them easily blends into their already existing lifestyle is also something that you people take into cognizance when doing these programs as well for both women and youth. And I like the part where you mentioned that people can work across the value chain, not just in production. So there's the opportunity to sell the product, there's the opportunity to package the product, process the product. Thank you so much for highlighting that. What would you say is the role that technology plays? Let's say, for instance, a mobile extension service, drought resistant seedling, precision farming plays in strengthening agricultural practice in displaced communities.
I think it plays a more and more important role. And when people talk about technologies, it's always like, okay, everybody has a smartphone with a lot of apps, but that's not the case always. So it can go beyond that one. And as you mentioned, precision farming, and it's not like, here in the Western world, you have huge tractors that you have computers, and then you can program that this much fertilizer, for example, is coming out here and there. But you can also do that in a displacement setting or in more basic agriculture production. It's like one cup, like on a Coca-Cola bottle with fertilizer. Instead of just throwing the fertilizer around the whole thing, you give it to the plants that need it, not the whole area around. So that is also precision farming. It's a simplified way, but it actually works quite well. But we are using more and more, for example, weather apps. Not everybody has that opportunity, but you can use it, and you can then convey it to radio programs, for example, so that you can convey the message through radio, which many people are listening to, and they are saying that, okay, the predictions are this or that, and either you farm now, you plant now, you harvest in this time, these kind of things. So there are different ways of using technology. You just need to know what is the options in the area that you're working. And by being a bit closer to the communities and engaging with the communities, we do something we call community engagement. So making sure that we don't tell them what to do, they should tell us what they need. And then we can work together on figuring out these kind of things. So, and again, there is not one size fits all. It's really important to know what are the needs in the different communities and how we together can address that in the best possible way.
Okay, fantastic. So there's a need for need assessment, and also there's also the need for sort of a collaboration between NRC and the people that you guys are serving to create the solution that is good for the context where they are. Because, like you mentioned, there might not be precision agriculture practice there because there are not a lot of machines and things. But providing situational context for them to say, okay, this Coca-Cola cap can be used to apply fertilizer, those kinds of things, because it's also novel. So technology is not restricted to just apps and laptops and drones and things like that, but things helping them improve their processes beyond the way they would normally practice. Okay, that's good. That's good to know. So, how can policymakers, let's say policymakers, NGOs, local governments, sort of collaborate to ensure a much more effective and enabling environment for agricultural livelihood in humanitarian crisis? So, what do you foresee are some of the policy shifts that are urgently needed to ensure this?
Yeah, I think this is one of the important things that we are also doing in NRC, and I also know many other organizations are doing that. So we advocate for the rights of the displaced people, that they should have equal opportunity as the people that are already there. Of course, again, as we talked about, it is difficult because a lot of the legal aspects, there are laws that are very strict for refugees, for example, in many countries, and that is what we need to advocate for, that there should be equal opportunities for displaced people as the people that are already living there. But then, you might end up in conflicts between the host community and the refugees because they feel someone is coming in, taking your resources, getting advantages because they get support as refugees, but the host communities doesn't get so much because they are already there, but they might still be in a very difficult situation. Mm-hmm. So advocacy is something that is important and that we do quite a lot, and to look at system change, like the bigger system change, like to include, as I mentioned before, displaced people in at least that they have the equal opportunities, to make sure that they can actually do meaningful farming, as we are talking about in this case, but also business development, because in some cases, when we're talking about the whole value chain, it is the production is the initial, but in the next phases of the food system in a value chain, there are so many opportunities, but then displaced people need to have the same opportunities to actually run a business for input supply, for example, or selling their produce in the local market or in the regional market or even in the global market if you manage to aggregate a higher volume. So it is about the opportunities that we need to advocate for, in addition to the practical kind of work on how to produce, how to do this, how to make sure you have access to different inputs and so on.
Fantastic. So my next question at this time is, if you could sort of cite like a case study or like an example of a major challenge that you guys had to recently overcome, and how that was overcome in the process of executing a particular program within the displaced community.
Yeah, well, there will be many, but I think the one that I mentioned from Uganda is a very good example. We do something similar also in Nigeria, in Somalia, in Ethiopia, in many of the contexts that we are operating. We have these kind of similar challenges, but again, as I said, it has to be context specific because it is different in the different context. But I visited Kenya earlier this year in the Dadaab refugee camp, where, the opportunity for the people to actually work in the agriculture value chain. It was very challenging to work on agriculture production because there were very limited access to land and even more limited access to water. So then we figured out, okay, what else can we do? And then we tried to work on the wider value chain for agriculture. And that has worked out quite well by giving them the opportunity to start a business, to run a business, as I mentioned, because there were some limitations on what they were allowed to do. But by making sure they have access to legal documents and then register a business, then they could actually work in the value chain related to agriculture, even if they were not producing the food themselves, because that was really not an opportunity because of the limitation for land and water.
Okay, fantastic. So my final question to you at this time is, for any young agricultural economist, development practitioner, innovator within Africa that is viewing this podcast right now, what would you say are like some of the practical steps that they can start taking to contribute meaningfully towards building resilient food systems within the humanitarian context or even post conflict settings?
I would say that number one, talk to the people that you are supposed to work with. Don't assume that, because sometimes we assume that we are trained people, we have done this for many years and we know what to do, but it is different in each location. and the people, even if they are refugees, they have knowledge. They come with knowledge. They are not like totally ignorant when they are coming, so they know something. So talk to them. What are their needs? What can we do together? And then you also need to do the assessments, as we mentioned. So what are the barriers, the challenges in this specific location on how we can do things? And then you decide on what you want to do, depending on what either resources you have, capacity you have, and look at both the production, the processing, the packaging, the selling, like the whole value chain, the whole food system. Because very often we stop at the production, and then we think like, okay, we have done production, done, fine, we are good, people have something to eat. But then if they produce a little bit more, it is the next step. How can you market this? How can you sell this? And to make sure that not everybody is producing the same at the same time, because then you will oversaturate the market, then there will not be any profit in what you're selling. Then you might even go with loss. And people need to have that feeling, and especially young people. If we should engage more young people, they don't think it's that cool digging in the dirt, to be honest. Yeah. But maybe they could have another role in the value chain. They might be entrepreneurs. They are good in selling things or processing or developing whatever has been produced, and that is an opportunity that we need to look at. So look at the wider spectrum, and not just like this is the one thing that we can do. But the most important thing is really to talk to the people. They need to be engaged in what we are doing.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Dr. Andersen, for just coming on the podcast today and sharing with us your insights, your expertise, and your knowledge. It's been quite an enriching and enlightening conversation with you today. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you again for inviting me.
Fantastic.